pa 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 ga ma re sa 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 re 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 pa 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 ga ma re sa 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 ni da ma pa ni da ni sa re 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 sa 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 ni da ma pa ni da ni sa re 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 sa sa sa.
Well, going through the list of films in the panorama section this year, the regional films, one gets the uneasy feeling that there is some kind of a crisis of confidence or coming up with the right theme or a social commentary. It's quite another matter to talk about the financial viability of a regional film. It's true that some of these filmmakers have moved over to Bombay to experiment with Hindi films because the regional film is not viable in terms of a box office. But it's quite another matter to talk about theme concerns. And what one notices this year is, in terms of theme concern, there seems to be a kind of a problem. They're obviously at a crossroads. Many of the films we are talking about at this festival have rather straightforward narratives which are either set in a period or in a contemporary society, and they talk about a very obvious kind of situation. There isn't that subtle intuition into aspects of society, that getting away from the basic facts of society into the mind of the filmmaker or the director to vest the film with that ineffable quality. That apart, the other problem is, as far as the regional film goes, what are the theme concerns in terms of crisis? It would seem to me that we have had good films wherever there were points of crisis in our history, in the development of Indian history. And in this context, we have a very interesting film this time from Assam, which is set in 1983, when there was this political movement, upheaval as it were, in Assam. And a filmmaker who's familiar with that milieu could cash in on it very well, which is what Jahanu Barua from Assam has done.
Your last feature film, Aparupa, was a love story, a triangle with a touch of adultery, I think.
Yeah.
And so what made you shift to politics?
Look, Khalid, when the movement started in 79, I mean later part of 79, I was shooting my first film, Aparupa, and the movement started then I had to pack up my shooting, and I had to wait for another 2 years.
Why did you have to pack up?
There was some political disturbance and there's some murder case in that that very location.
Where you were shooting?
Yeah, where I was shooting. The deputy commissioner came and told me that please pack up, please go. Then, so I had to pack up. I came back to Bombay, and for about 2 years I struggled to find out some identical locations. But in the meanwhile, what happened actually, I was getting in touch with the movement, and slowly I found myself getting more involved, involved in the agitation. And of course, you know that it went on for 6 years. 6 years, and I found myself getting involved more and more, but not as a representative of any political party. I don't belong to any political party as such, or not in an organization, but as an individual. I got very mentally disturbed.
But what I wanted to know is, did you have trouble while making it? Was there any kind of interference?
Yeah, there was a little bit, but as a filmmaker, I had to be very tactful.
What's a little bit?
A little bit, I don't know whether I have that much of... anyway, some problems I had, which...
what was the police interference?
There's some intelligence interference, while I was shooting, that Assam Accord was nowhere in sight. And that was, I always give credit to myself for attempting such a film. But I completed the shooting. I told lies to people that I was making some other film. Romantic story. So some people, used to come and watch the shooting. So I used to take some fake scene.
Romantic
I used to do.
Scenes.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you feel about your role in Papuri? It's an obvious question, but how did you exactly work on it? Because it's a pretty complex and tough role, isn't it?
Yeah, like Janu said, the subplot is Assam agitation. So here this character vis-a-vis a housewife thrown into different situations. I mean, she doesn't have a slightest, foggiest idea of so-called feminist, this thing, or any awareness, or she's not bold, strong enough. But then she's thrown into certain situations, and at one level, the whole struggle is at political level, the general scene in Assam, and here one different separate character struggling on different levels, like.
Right.
Yeah.
So, how did you exactly direct her? Did you give her a lot of instructions, or you left her?
Well, it was so difficult, Khalid, to do Assamese thing initially because the language was absolutely alien.
It's a different story, I'll tell you. That Gopi was supposed to be assisting me in that film, initially. And I had problems, as I told you. One of the problems is that casting, because some of the people, came to know that it's a political and supposed to be first film. And people are very much, very much conscious about it. And then people came to know. And then the kind of heroines I selected for this film, and somehow they had reasons to back out from the film. Last minute, that final selection was selected. She backed up, and I said, "Gopi, you from behind the camera, I come in the front of the camera."
There's a lot of disturbance, there's a lot of distress right now that the new Indian cinema is dying, dead, going. Where do you feel it's at?
Yeah, I agree with you. Actually, it's dying. It's very sad. But I really, blame ourselves. Ourselves means
Filmmakers.
Filmmakers. I'll tell you that new movement, when it started, this new cinema movement, mainly that problem is the block which is coming from finance. Finance is becoming the main problem.
Playing cleverly between the lines then, Jahanu Barua gives us a victim of a political process at a particular phase of history in Assam. We have another film in much the same strain in the Panorama section again this year, and this time it's by John Abraham. John, with just 3 films, Chiriyachinde Krurakratingal, Agraharathil Kazhudai before that, and now Amme Ariyan, which roughly translated would be a report to a mother, and combined with a very angular personality, has established himself as the enfant terrible of Indian cinema. Amme Ariyan is very much alike Papuri in many ways because the theme concern is the same. Here again we are talking about a particular phase in Kerala's history where political extremism led to its own victims and its own human agony and a distortion of a social process. That's John Abraham's Amme Ariyan. John, how much did it cost you to make this film finally, Amme Ariyan?
I think it's about 4.25.
4.25?
Yeah.
I see. And you got all of this from the people of Kerala?
Yeah.
And what kinds of contributions? Huge amounts?
So we started, I told you, on Rupees, and somebody, when I was shooting in Prasar, one boy gave me 2 rupees. I was very happy. I hugged him and kissed him. That's the only money he had.
That's right.
He asked him, do you have the bus fare to go back to your home? He said, I have 50 NB with me. But I would like to contribute to this kind of movement.
That's right.
That was a great contribution, I felt, And I thought about the Bible, and somebody gave one something to Jesus Christ, He said, that is the greatest offering.
That's right. Maybe John, another subject, if I might broach here. You were saying some time back that when you see a film of masters, let's say like Louis Buñuel, you feel like a midget before that. Huh? And why are not our filmmakers rising to that kind of a stature in terms of experimentation?
No, we had a lot of hangovers, because film is not born in India, born elsewhere, in Europe, and America has taken it over, the commercial business, big marketing. So that they copied it, and the people got opiumed, kind of opiuming, say some kind of frivolous sex, some kind of fights. It's an escapist fantasy.
If you're looking for an epic in this film festival, I think we easily arrive at one in Roland Joffe's phenomenal spectacle, The Mission. The film directed by Roland Joffe, it's his second film. You remember his earlier film, The Killing Fields, which was set in the 1970s in Cambodia, from which he goes far back to the 1750s in South Americas. And the central axis, the central plot of the film, is about a Jesuit mission in the jungles of Paraguay, out there to save the natives, the tribals, from exploitation by slave traders. And the film goes on to talk about two primary characters played by Jeremy Irons and Robert De Niro, a very remarkable performance that. De Niro plays the role of Mendoza, an ex-slave trader turned Jesuit priest who is torn between obedience to the church and his nascent awakening, his humaneness for the tribals and what he should do for them, defying the edicts. And the whole issue is about this mission and how they are thrown into conflict with edicts issued by rival colonial powers, Spain and Portugal, 1,000 miles away. That The Mission by Roland Joffe, scripted by Robert Bolt, and Robert Bolt here comes up with another remarkable script after his Man for All Seasons. The concern is much the same. In the earlier film he was talking about the conflict between the church and the state. Here he is too, except that here he's talking about specifically about the conflict between the church and Marxism, which, as he himself comments, is the impinging concern as far as Latin America is concerned today. And his sympathies are with both sides. Roland Joffe's The Mission, set in the jungles of Paraguay, which took years to make and around which a subculture of pulp has already grown.
Action! Right, well, it was a good try, lads. It was a good try, but it wasn't good enough. We have to do it again.
Well, there is Indian cinema and Indian cinema. I'm referring here to the variants of regional cinema in India. Regional cinema, as we are often told, is real Indian cinema. As against, say, European cinema, which, whether it's French or Italian, has a distinctiveness about it in terms of the stylistics, in terms of the form, the formal approaches, and so on. Here too there are very stark differences. There is a concern at one end, say Money Call for instance, whose formal elements are very strong, and of course there is a formal content concept in his films, and that ipso facto, as far as is concerned, leads to communication. In Aravindan we have a filmmaker who is irreverent of his environment, who is a mystic in many ways, at the same time a communicator in his own way. Tapan Sinha is a third type who talks about films in a far more realistic, in a far more intimate sense with society. And let us hear what these three, I think, disparate filmmakers have to say about new Indian cinema, where it is today, and where do we go from here.
Your filmmaking, there has been a sort of a murmur in certain quarters that you have not been able to evolve a style of your own. In fact, you have been busy in following a narrative tradition in filmmaking. Yes. And in the evolution of cinema, we perhaps know by now that it is the non-narrative pattern which is stealing the march over others. Do you feel that your sticking to the narrative tradition is something out of choice, or you feel that perhaps the non-narrative tradition is not conducive to filmmaking? What is your view?
I really don't contrive the style, and I never try to develop a particular style of mine, you see. Because I told you that when I joined film, I was greatly influenced by the American directors and British directors in those days. For instance, if you study John Ford or William Wyler, you will see that they have made different kinds of films. And I studied them very carefully, and I think they influenced me so much that I never tried to develop a particular style of mine. And I left to the subject matter. I thought, let the subject matter dictate the style. I followed that all through my life.
I think you have a reputation of being a difficult, within single inverted commas, filmmaker. Difficult not as a person, but as a filmmaker, right? And the trend, just this morning, an important critic was telling me that our filmmakers should be more communicative. People should understand what they're talking about. Would you like to comment on this?
Well, I feel that there is space, first of all, for all kinds of cinema in India. Mm-hmm. The kind of films I'm making is more concerned with raising questions about looking at reality and the kind of sensuousness that is attached with it. Mm-hmm. When you communicate, mm-hmm. you don't necessarily raise new questions, you know. regard to the sensuousness, you know, so the sensuous interpretation of life, or a way of looking at life, you know, the way of looking at space.
Yeah.
It's possible that the way I look at space is not very acceptable today,
Quite, yes.
but it's perhaps pushing us towards a direction which will become commonplace tomorrow.
Yeah.
I mean, after all, it's not very unusual that hoardings are painted in the way Vincent van Gogh painted at one point, but he died painting like that.
Right.
He went mad trying to make images of that sort. But today you will have some paint company using Vincent van Gogh imagery for advertising.
Yeah.
I mean, it's totally lacking any kind of anguish that Vincent van Gogh had. So I don't think that in this world of communication anybody will be left out. Everybody will be absorbed one time or the other.
If the films we have been seeing in the panorama section, or as later in the panorama section this year, are any indication, it would seem that our new filmmakers, or you know, the different filmmakers as they're called, seem to be veering away from initial preoccupation, I thought, with some element of experimentation with form, etc., to more simple communication, more slick kind of films, certainly well packaged and so on. And there is one school of opinion which thinks this is good. It's far more easier to understand. It's very simple narrative structure and so on. But I think, do you think this is a dangerous trend, or do you agree with me in the first place?
You see, I think communication in cinema, unlike in other art forms, has to necessarily deal with mass communication, because it's a form of that kind, you know.
Okay.
I'm not talking of my work now.
Right.
I'm talking of those who are anxious to communicate, which is fine with me, you know. There are filmmakers whom I respect and who are in the realm of mass communication. Now, when it comes to mass communication, in the contemporary modern sense, it's very strange, but it boils down to the fact as to how one deals with sex and violence.
Yeah.
Because I think all forms of mass communication today...
This becomes a litmus test, yes.
Yeah, it is like that, you know. I mean, I'd like to understand how the filmmaker is dealing with violence, and how he's dealing with sex. When I say sex, I mean the erotic, actually. And when I mean violence, I'm referring to violence that transforms our society. So I think that both sex and violence can be used in a manner, because all epochs, all societies, all social changes have occurred because of violence and because of the changed view of eroticism. So there is nothing wrong in that, you know. But I think that as long as cinema is serving sex and violence, then it's no good. But if, on the other hand, cinema, if sex and violence makes me think highly of cinema, if it finds the modern idiom, it finds the new idiom for cinema, then I'd be very happy, you know. But if what you're saying in terms of veering away means that they are making cinema serve sex and violence, which means serve a certain consumerist idea of sex and violence, then I think it's just a few steps away from commercial cinema. Whereas if it is actually giving us a new view, you know, of the eroticism and of violence, then it's perfectly valid.
Arvindan, now when you're talking about new Indian cinema, and particularly in Kerala, which you're very familiar with, you have made so many films. All of them have won you national and international recognition and awards in many cases. And yet, from what you said at the press conference yesterday, and knowing you, I know that each time for you making a film is a struggle. Don't you think this is a pathetic state of affairs for a filmmaker in India?
It is, but I think talking to some of the filmmakers outside, it's almost a universal problem.
I see.
Yeah, that's my feeling.
I see. But say in Europe and France and so on, the state gives a good kind of grant for a filmmaker. Do we have the same kind of system, or do you think there needs to be?
I think we must have some sort of thing like that, especially with a lot of young talented people coming out from the institute and otherwise. Without getting proper assistance from the government, I don't think it's very difficult for a person like me with at least 15 years of experience of filmmaking. I find it very difficult to make a film.
Right.
That means to get a producer, in the sense. So, but luckily with my, maybe my credibility, that's my investment now.
Yeah.
So without spending much money, I have a producer as well now. But I'm forced to be a producer.
Right. because you can't find one
Yeah,
outside
that's
easily
right.
enough.
Yeah.
Arvind, the other thing is about the theme concerns of new Indian cinema, as is reflected to a large extent in the panorama section this year. Earlier on, we had, I think, challenging kind of formal departures. This year, it seems to me that by and large, we have come down to the straight and simple narrative. Very socially relevant, no doubt, but in terms of experimentation with form, we seem to have gone back rather than forward. Is this your opinion also? Would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, that's. I think that's a sort of natural evolution, in the sense that many people try different forms, and but many of these films where it was very much on the formalistic state or formalistic, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
They found it very difficult to get an outlet. Most of them remain in the cans even now.
Okay.
So people are forced to think about different form which is palpable, which is more acceptable.
And then if you take, the other thing which has struck me is if you take the commercial films, let us say, and now they've become very slick and polished in terms of a packaging, you know.
Yeah.
And if you take some of the films, I wouldn't like to mention names because it would embarrass you to comment on colleagues' films, but some films I have seen have certainly very close to the commercial film in terms of the polish and slickness. Certainly there is some better insight into society, clever, adept handling here and there, some slickness, which means is the gap narrowing, and is this good or bad?
I think it's good in one way, because the commercial film, the so-called commercial film arena, they are taking a lot of things from the other set, like the slick editing patterns, or more concerned with the camera, the sound. So instead of a very sort of total carelessness on the part of the technical aspects, even action themes, they start in one way, taking things from the other side. And as I said earlier, the other side also is trying to make things more palpable. You know? That way, it's better that this sort of delineation gets dissolved.
In a festival where there are so many screenings going on simultaneously at various theatres, we do sometimes tend to lose our way and are not able to bring you so many official functions which are also going on and are as significant. But we try. For example, we had a very significant function over the last 2 days, which was a release of a new publication by the NFDC. It was released by the Information and Broadcasting Secretary, Mr. Girish Mehra.
Many of our most widely circulated and read magazines are film magazines.
And of course, we are very happy that the Bombay industry, which at one time was hesitant about being in on this festival, is here in very good strength. And to reinforce this point, here is Mr. Sarkar, President of the Film Federation of India.
You see, the 11th International Film Festival of India, now being held in New Delhi, is almost a week old by now, and the teething troubles seem to be getting over. I am happy that the Bombay film industry has ultimately decided to participate in this particular festival, which has enabled many of the viewers to see their films in the mainstream section, and also the delegates from east, north, south, and from all over India to interact with them on the all India level. And you see, as far as these festivals are concerned, the success or failures of such festivals will always depend on how good or how bad the films are. But unfortunately, certain extraneous matters as to who has been invited to a particular function or who unfortunately has been missed out from a particular reception, they also have their weight on it. But everything said and done, I must thank the Directorate of Film Festival for the efforts they have made for whatever we have seen or whatever things have happened. But as far as the Film Federation of India is concerned, we are glad that we were given more authority this time as far as the delegateship is concerned, or as far as the selection of the films for the mainstream cinema are concerned. But as far as coordination is concerned, we have had some meetings with them before the start of the festival, and to sort out all the day-to-day problems and all the day-to-day grievances of the delegates who come from every nook and corner of the country to attend such festivals. The Directorate of Film Festival must have a very continuous dialogue with the Film Federation and the film industry in course of the festival also, so that these day-to-day problems of the delegates can be sorted out on the spot.
The title of our seminar is The Documentary Film Today, Potential and Reality. I do hope that this seminar today will at least send forth this tiny ripple of hope.
In a very short space of time, the Indian Documentary Producers Association and Films Division have taken out this book, and I'm sure it contains very informative and interesting articles.
The problem with documentary cinema in India, unfortunately, has been that whenever somebody hears the word documentary, they say, "Arey, documentary film hai, kaun dekhega? Chalo chalte hain." The reason is very simple. The reason is that we have not, as an audience, been educated in what the real potential of documentary is.
A third stream is now rising in many countries. Individual, substantial, contemporary films looking to an educated rather than a purely mass audience, but still seeking to join the mainstream. Most film countries know this experience. It's a tension, it's hardly a competition. The intellectual or artistic or experimental film seeks to reach into the mainstream to gain economic reward and so strengthen the chances of independent filmmakers to expand into areas of culture, imagination, literature, indeed all the arts.
If this FAB approval become easy and Films Division can take the responsibility, because as they have the distribution network already worked out all India, so it's better to release the film, and probably it's easier to release the film through Films Division, and probably Films Division can invest money on prints and recover, and probably the documentary will be successful after that. Otherwise, private distribution, I feel it is quite difficult at this moment.
If we convert that, if we transfer our films onto video and make use of the facilities that are going to be available in the villages, through public pressure, there is going to be nothing to stop their exhibition.
Primarily because unlike feature films, you don't have a private network of distribution. You have to rely on the two government bodies for documentaries to be distributed. A, the Films Division, and B, Doordarshan. As far as Doordarshan is concerned, I think that is going to play a much larger role in the future, because it is a medium which is actually a mass medium and therefore has access to millions of Indians whom you want to reach out with your documentaries. And I think Doordarshan can play a very vital role, A, by trying to have a slot sometime in the night as a compulsory documentary viewing, and B, by doing something which I think they've done with the feature films, which is a premiere telecast. I mean, you have premiere telecast of feature films, and it would be a very good idea if outstanding documentaries made in this country were given premiere telecast and paid the right kind of money.
Let us really and seriously consider whether we have tried to create an audience for documentary films. Therefore, apart from producing the documentaries, I would humbly recommend to you that there has to be a sustained campaign about the things that you want to say through your documentary. Whether it is through societies, whether it is through press, I think it is for you.
As it regards the alternative channels, unfortunately there are very few, but the fact remains that they have not been exploited. One is the film society. Film societies have not taken sufficient interest in the release of documentaries. Second is other government bodies like the field publicity units, the family planning units and associations, so on and so forth. Thirdly, there is a huge circuit in the universities.
What was the reason for selecting this particular theme, documentary film today, potential and reality, as the theme of your seminar?
The key words really were potential and reality, and it was felt amongst the documentary filmmaking community that perhaps the crisis that the documentary film faces today, shrinking institutional support, shrinking outlets because the Films Division is in its own crisis and is commissioning fewer films. Doordarshan doesn't seem as amenable to the documentary film as we had hoped, or as its mandate might suggest. So it was felt that out of an appreciation of what it is that the documentary film can achieve, what it can do, and has done in other societies and other cultures, both in the context of development strategies and in revitalizing ideas of democracy, that if enough people appreciated this role, maybe that would provide the impetus to shifts in perception amongst decision makers, amongst people in a position to influence policy, and thus benefit the documentary filmmaker in the long run.
While we were chatting before this discussion, Arvindan had his pen and paper out and was scribbling furiously away. And that's typical because Arvindan started out as a cartoonist, at least we know him first and foremost as a cartoonist. He ran this regular cartoon serial in Madhurabhumi, a weekly in Kerala, called Cheriya Manusharam Veliya Logavam, which roughly translated means small people in a big world. Besides which, of course, Arvindan is a prodigious, a very compulsive traveler. He knows almost every nook and cranny of Kerala. He goes by foot, by cycle, by scooter, and he's also, you can see him suddenly taking off and advising people on how rubber should be grown because he's been with the rubber boat for a long time. And he's a painter, he's into tantrism, and there we have Arvindan. I hope he doesn't mind my disclosing all these personal details. The philosopher, filmmaker of India, and certainly one of our foremost. And it's typical that in this cartoon he should again revert, I think, to the theme of Ramu, which I was talking about, who is the small man in the big world. And I think this applies equally well to the film festival this time. There are quite a few of our filmmakers, directors who are lost in the bigness and the splendor and the glamour of it all, not quite sure why they are here.